Are you ready? Today we're going to talk about Sigmarus Fusion, and as you can see here, I currently have all the base materials or monsters that go into getting the Water Phoenix. So what I would like to do is share some strategies, a little bit of my story of going through and trying to obtain Sigmarus here. And then kind of give you a general overall timeline as a player to kind of give you an idea as you're working through this process about potentially how long it could take you to get SIG. So one of the things, as you can see, is I had already had all the fusion monsters to get up to, those next level monsters and ultimately Sigmarus. But one of the things that you'll see, and as we talk through in these lessons learned for me, is I forgot going into this process how material intensive it actually is. So as you can see here, I'm currently was moving over my monsters to go through the awakening process, and we're just going to start going to awaken these monsters for that next piece of the process. So a couple things that I want to point out is obviously when you've already got all your material monsters, and most of those are either going to come from your secret dungeon runs, things like your unknown scroll summons or mystical scrolls, and maybe you buy purchase premium packs like myself. What I typically do is I try and keep one of those fusion monsters always in my inventory, and luckily Com2Us had released a patch a while back where now we can see when you're going to evolution or eating monsters that, hey, maybe you shouldn't eat this one because it was fusion material, because traditionally before you kind of had to just lock them and understand which ones that were going in, but obviously Com2Us has made some great improvements around this process for us. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you kind of get your base layer of materials for fusion, which would be inclusive of those monsters that you're trying to obtain. So good things to keep in mind. As you'll see here, I highly underestimated the materials for the actual awakening process. The next monster here that I'm going to get at is this golem, and I'm obviously out of the mid essence here. So to give you an idea as we move into this next piece, and why I'm actually showing the dungeon run here is because of the fact that it is very, very time intensive. If you make a mistake like myself here and completely underestimate, you're going to have to spend some time running and farming the different materials. So this is going to be inclusive of these magic essences. So luckily for this first part here, I did have all the other necessarily elemental materials that I needed to awaken these base monsters. However, I had to end up running the Hall of Magic quite a bit. I think I spent about a day on it. I end up calculating, which we won't go through and show in this video, but for this first part, I actually needed an additional, I think it was like 60 mid essences, and I did end up running Hall of Magic 10. Now, one of the things that I don't know 100% for sure, but you might actually be better off running a different level to get some of those mid essences. I end up finding that it was much easier for me to actually get the high essence than it was for the mid, surprisingly. But one of the other benefits of running Hall of Magic was I was able to obtain a lot of other high essences for the different elementals that were needed. So this is the team that I use. I have Ramos here. This is a team that I've kept. I haven't made any updates, but as we go through this, I do end up making changes that we're not going to walk through today. I do have Hamir. I obviously have Vertihil here, and I move more towards a speed team for completing this running that I need for these mid essences. So just to give you an example again, this was my team that I use for my B10 runs, straight to the face, obviously, that you'll see here for this piece. So very, very crucial to understand that as you're going through this process, even though I had all the monsters already, I clearly underestimated the amount of materials that was going to be. So in essence, really my day one, I'll call it, for trying to get after Sig here was spent grinding the Hall of Magic to get those materials. Now, one of the things to think about is as you're approaching your fusion for Sigmarus is potentially laying out that time frame of when you want to do it. So I believe I started midweek. Part of the reason was for the weekend events. You probably want to keep it open so that you're not spending your time grinding Sigmarus when you could be potentially utilizing the weekend events for potential better account stuff. Maybe not, but just something to keep in mind that I definitely think is important. So as you can see, my time there was about 2.5 minutes, and I do get a mystical scroll, which was awesome. But obviously, there's a lot faster teams to getting through that. So that was just based off my piece. Now, moving into the next section, I grind out all the Hall of Magic materials that I need to complete these level 4-star monsters for Sigmarus. So one of the things that I do want to talk about and recap on these monsters that I think is important is, as I had mentioned, as I also keep those fusion material monsters, I'm also leveling those to 4-star and max XP in them. So all that stuff was done ahead of time before even getting into the Sigmarus process. A couple of the benefits are is once they're at 4-star, like I show, you can use them for the world boss. So my thing is always having, and very early on in my account, I've always had actually 3 full rotation teams for the world boss, and part of it's been just because of backpocketing. So backpocketing those monsters so that you always have availability with them, not only from that world boss piece, but really preemptively thinking about your fusion process. So something to really point out and think about, I believe I do mention that probably in the Veramos guide that I put together as well, which is kind of a similar story to this Sigmarus fusion process. It is very important in my opinion to do that. One of the other mistakes that I made that we don't actually show in this video is that as you are getting ready for Sigmarus, as I had mentioned, I use a lot of stuff for World Boss, so a lot of times I throw additional 5-star, 6-star runes on these guys. Typically they're not leveled up, but sometimes depending on the monster, if I had a free rune removal day and I'm moving some of those, actual upgraded runes down my monster stack, as I like to call it, some of these fusion materials will once in a while get some of the better runes. So with that said, it's important to think about that piece in utilization of a free rune removal. I honestly made the biggest mistake of pulling off a bunch of, they were pretty good runes, but obviously if I went to sell them, it was not worth the removal cost, stuff like that. So something to really keep in mind. Part of the reason why I did that too was just based off the percentage drop rates for things like Giants B10. In one of the videos that I walked through of showing that, hey, this 6-star rune has like a 2% drop rate, stuff like that. So utilizing that process as part of my rune decision now. So as you can see, I was actually short a couple mid essences here. So this is another way that you can get essences really quickly. Obviously, instead of farming them, you can fuse them. But it could get really costly here. I only spent 50k mana, but it does get quite spendy. And originally approaching this as well, I didn't have a lot of mana, so that's something to really keep in mind as you're going through. So as we finish out these monsters here, one of the benefits of doing those runs was obtaining additional mana to get through this process, because a lot of times you'll forget and it will be spendy, and you're probably, obviously go into your magic shop to see if there's things that you can buy. Which keep in mind that each of these base level monsters to get to the 4-star ones that we're going to need here, you're going to need mana. So now we're moving into this fusion process, so we need to make the excuse me, the fire jester here. So one of the things that you'll see is again, previously, before they actually assigned that fusion material kind of icon to the monsters in these um, in the game, I was actually going through and locking my monsters, which ideally is good practice. So even if they are fusion material, you're not accidentally, um, you know, eating those monsters that you could potentially be using down the road. So quickly here, we're going to go through and just pull off each of those locks so that we can go through this process and fuse that first layer of monsters that we're going to need to get through our fusion process. So that was a lot of talking. I just need to catch my breath there. um, so now that we've done the unlock piece, and as you can see, I try to keep this really clean for this process. But you're going to go in, you're going to select. So here's the Win 9 Tails we're going to make. We're going to go in and select the monsters. You got to go in and select each of the monsters. If you do have runes on them, like I did, you will actually end up destroying those runes. Like they don't come back to your inventory or anything like that. So that's why I mentioned previously aligning that into a free rune removal day. If by chance you're thinking about this process, or even the week before, just getting ready, something to think about. It will pull down your world boss stuff. This is one of the things that I noticed, obviously, is when you go through this really, really intense process to build a better monster like Sigmarus, you will take a small step back from an aggregate account level because it is very intensive, but in the long run, you're obviously going to win with Sigmarus here. So once we've gotten through this process, obviously the next step is going to be they're back to their base, you know, Nat 4 status, and we need to really, really start to focus on that next piece here, which, in my opinion, is just as important of your farming piece for the fusion materials. Not necessarily the magic materials or the elemental materials, but again, moving into, hey, I gotta grind my XP out. So biggest thing is I had a couple of boosters, so I'm applying those boosters. So as you can see, timing of your XP boosters or going in and purchasing the XP boost with your crystals is a very good idea. Again, for myself, I just tend to run Famine Hell with Lapis just because I like getting the runes to turn in for mana. It's decent mana farming as well. And recently with some of the buffs, with drop rates and stuff, I've noticed that you can tend to get some decent, I think it's like 5-star runes now that you can sell for like 10k mana. So those drop rates have kind of helped. So obviously you don't have to use Lapis, but it's highly encouraged by the time that you start getting to these fusion processes that you have some good carry monster to do the farming, and something like using Lucian for Hydeni, using Lucian for I don't think it's Chiruka, but Aiden, I think it was, sorry. Using Lucian for Aiden if he's very, very beefy from either damage, speed, stuff like that, attack power, just getting through that. My Lucian can't do that. I do have a Lucian that's good enough for Identity Runes. The trade-off here for me is I like doing Famine again, like I mentioned, just because of having that additional mana capability for that farming is just, in my opinion, a general better booster for I was at this particular spot. However, I do end up running Hydeni quite a bit with Lucian just because I can do it in like, I think it's like 20-30 second runs versus here with my Lapis, it's typically anywhere between like 45 seconds and a minute and a half. But again, it's that trade-off of, hey, are you going after XP, or are you going after these other things? So as you can see, about a minute and a half, but we do get quite a bit of experience. So this next piece, I spend all this time going through and farming Famine Volcano, some of the other things that I had mentioned. Eventually, we get there, we use the XP boosters to get through that piece. So I utilize the 2 XP boosters, and then on top of that, one of the other things that I line this all up with is it just so happened they're running another special event, like those burning time events, stuff like that. So they're actually offering the double mana, double XP at certain points in the day, which was great. So again, when I had previously talked about timing your fusion process, this was one of the things that was really helpful in that timing, because if I do run out, which I do, of that XP boosters that were in my inventory, you can now capitalize on some of these other events that are going on. One of the good parts is before I even got to this fusion process, I had already had enough materials to get all my monsters to 5-star, so I was able to also cut down on that time, which would be another piece of that process that you need to keep in mind, is having enough materials to take these guys from 4-star monsters to 5-star. Something to think about too is as you're going through this fusion process for Sigmarus or Vramos or other guys like that, essentially it is kind of a trade-off of 6-star and another monster to some degree, and that might be important in some of your decision-making process, because maybe you got a nat 5 and you want to bring them to 6-star first before you go through that fusion process. So if you don't necessarily have those materials and we look at a decision tree path, that is something else that you could potentially consider. So obviously once we've gone through the experience grind for the 4-star monsters, we now have them at 5, and we have to rerun that experience grinding process. So something to keep in mind again that I had previously mentioned of expediting this process is depending on the way that you farm. I do move off of here again. I show that I'm doing Fame and Hell again, but I do move off this and go to my Lucian just based off the time that I have left on my experience kind of double XP stuff. I do end up running a little bit short. The Water Ninja, which you don't see here, I end up farming outside of my experience double XP boosters with those kind of burning time events to eventually finish off my Water Ninja to get to exactly where I need to be. The other thing that I end up doing that we don't show is that, as previously stated, I ran out of those materials for the awakening again with the magic. So obviously when we went through those base guys, I calculated specifically for those. I hadn't gone on and calculated for the next group of monsters. So outside that, I end up going and collecting all the magic essence that are needed. So it's very important to keep that in mind. You need to keep the magic essences at each stage. You need to have the materials at each stage for the monsters to get them to where they need to be from a evolution perspective and XP perspective. And then you obviously need to have all the elemental stuff as well. So one of the things that I partnered this or timed it out really well. So here we're going to show that I have all the materials. Over the weekends, there was also the all elemental dungeon event. So that was the other key that I timed it to, was, hey, if I was missing other materials for that awakening piece, using the dungeon event over the weekend allowed me to capitalize on that. So it was literally like this. It was a day of running for the essences for the base level monsters that I already had at the fusion material level. Evolution level for fusion. Obviously, like I showed, you fuse those monsters, then you go into experience grind. So it was mats one day, experience grind day 2, experience grind day 3. It was elemental dungeons over the weekend, plus again more experience grinding based off the burning time events, as well as getting the rest of the magic essences, which gets us to where we are right now of, hey, we got all the monsters that we need, we got all the materials that we need to put into those monsters, and we are fortunate enough to go ahead and utilize those monsters for Sigmarus. and congrats. Within about a week, I was able to fully go from end to end of getting Sigmarus. One of the important things to mention again was each of those monsters took 100k. Sig, each of those monsters at 4-star took 100k. Sigmarus takes half a mil, as we saw. Great for all sorts of teams to utilize things like DB10, stuff like that. I did just want to briefly go look and see if anyone said congrats. It's just kind of fun to do that once in a while, or geez. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is, on top of that, utilizing that weekend grinding for the mats, I also did enough grinding to bring Sigmarus to Awakening right away, which I always find helpful and important. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, please write them below in the video. You can message me on Gmail or whatever on my website, stuff like that. Thanks for watching. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I hope that this guide helped you consider things ahead of time, also while you're going through the process to getting Sig. Like I said, it took me approximately 7 days after I already had all the base monsters set, just based off personal schedule, utilizing things like experience boosters, getting the materials that were needed, and ultimately getting the money and stuff to summon Sig. Thanks for watching.